lot of fun after hours here. This is a great group. Now, as I mentioned, the point of this exercise wasn't for fun. It was to prove one of the biggest lessons I've learned in 12 years of studying the mindset of growth. Now, by a show of hands, who saw a physiological change in their partner the second round? And give me full arms. Okay, great. Now the more important question. Who could feel a complete physiological change within yourself the second round? Hands up all the way. Perfect, the whole room. Now, what you just proved to me is that you were able to change your heart rate, pupil dilation, your entire body language, your entire results changed by changing a single variable. You were talking to the same person in the same room, same conference, same name badge, same job title. You were just as handsome. What was the difference? What was the one variable we changed between the first and second half of the experiment? That's right, exactly right. We changed the mindset, we changed the story. We told ourselves about who was standing in front of us. And a collection of stories in our mind, of course, is what we call a mindset, which proves that you all were able to change your results entirely by simply changing your mindset, which proves that our results are completely tied to the stories we tell ourselves. Our results in our careers, in our personal lives, are completely tied to the stories we tell ourselves, which is great news. Because that means if we want to change our results, the fastest way to do that is to change our stories. And that's what we're going to do together over the next hour. Again, as Kim said, my name is Alex. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. And the reason I'm so excited is, you all had a lot of choices of different rooms to be in. And it's always fun when I get to be with the room of people who said, yes, I want to grow my career. Yes, I want to grow my team's mindset. You all are my type of people. So what we're going to do today is we're really going to dive in to the theme of the conference overall. The theme of Workhuman Live is to elevate HR, and we're going to do that, but we're going to do it in a specific way. We're going to do that by focusing on our own mindsets. Because I'm a believer that if we elevate our own mindsets, the whole HR industry grows as well. And great, right off the bat, I like it. There we go. That's $20 for you right there. I asked her to do it at the end, but the beginning's not bad either. Thank you. Now, what we're going to do today is I'm going to share some of the biggest lessons I've learned from this 12-year journey of studying the mindset of growth and success. I'll also share one of the biggest tools I've learned of what it takes to persevere on that journey in the long run. And then we're going to save about 20 minutes at the end to open it up into Q&A, to hear what's on your mind, what you're dealing with at work, what you want to know, to make it really practical and interactive. Now, before we dive in to some of the big stories, I'll give you a little bit of context. So, for the past 12 years, I've been obsessively studying success. I've spent thousands of hours researching, going through hundreds of biographies, and most importantly, sitting down one-on-one and asking questions to the people I was dying to get answers from. So for business, I interviewed Bill Gates. For music, Lady Gaga. For science, Jane Goodall. For poetry, Maya Angelou. Quincy Jones, Steve Wozniak, Larry King, Jessica Alba, Pitbull. It's been this really exciting journey, filled with unexpected lessons at every turn. And the reason I'm so excited to be here with all of you is to really share the biggest lessons I've learned from this 12-year journey so you can take it back to your teams and make it as applicable as possible for the people that you lead. Now, to give you some context to how the journey got started, I got to take you back 15 years. So at the time, I was a freshman in college, and I was spending every day lying on my dorm room bed, staring up at the ceiling. And I was going through the what do I want to do with my life crisis. And actually, so I get a sense for the room, because I know there's people of all different ages here, who at some point in their life, or maybe even now, has gone through the what do I want to do with my life crisis. Give me full arms so I get a real sense of the room. Okay, we're at about 98% of the room, about 2% liars over there. So we're good. So, to understand why I was going through it, you have to understand that I'm the son of Persian Jewish immigrants. which pretty much means I came out of the womb, my mom cradled me in her arms, and then she stamped doctor on my behind and sent me on my way. They might think I'm joking, but I literally wore medical scrubs to school for Halloween as a kid and thought I was cool. Now, that was my childhood growing up. And in high school, I checked all the boxes. I took all the biology classes, I studied for the SATs, I even went to pre-med summer camp. So by the time I got to college, I was the pre-med of pre-meds. But very quickly, I found myself lying on this dorm room bed, looking at this towering stack of biology books, feeling like it was sucking the life out of me. And at first, I assumed, maybe I'm just being lazy. But eventually, I began to wonder, maybe I'm not on my path. Maybe I'm on a path somebody else placed me on, and I'm just rolling down. So now, not only did I not know what I wanted to do with my life, I had no idea how the people who I looked up to, how they did it. How did Bill Gates sell that first piece of software out of his dorm room when nobody knew his name? How did Lady Gaga get that first record deal without a single hit under her belt? This is what they don't teach you in school. So I just assumed there had to be a book with the answers. So I'm going to the library and I'm ripping through business books and biographies and self-help books, assuming there had to be a book, not at a particular age in life, but really a stage. When you have a big goal, when you have a big dream, when no one's taking your calls, no one's taking your meetings, how do you find a way to break through? And eventually, I was left empty-handed. And that's when my naive 18-year-old thinking kicked in, and I thought, well, if no one's written the book I'm dreaming of reading, why not write it myself? And I thought it'd be super simple. I thought I would just call Bill Gates, interview him, interview everybody else, I'll be done in a couple months. That, I assumed, would be the easy part. The hard part, I figured, was getting the money to fund this journey. I was bare to student loan debt. I was all out of bar mitzvah cash. So there had to be a way to make some money. So 2 nights before final exams, I'm in the library doing what everyone does in the library right before finals. I was on Facebook. And I was on Facebook, and I saw somebody offering free tickets to the game show The Price is Right. And again, trying to get a sense from who grew up watching The Price is Right, who really knows that show. Okay, there are 2 arms over there, I like it. Now, I was going to college in Los Angeles, not too far from where the show films. And the tickets were for the next morning. And my first thought was, what if I go on the show and win some money to fund this dream? Not my brightest moment, because I had finals in 2 days, and on top of that, I'd never seen a full episode of the show before. Of course, I'd seen bits and pieces of it when I was homesick from school in 4th grade, but I'd never seen a full episode before, so I told myself it was a dumb idea and to not think about it. I don't know if any of you have ever had one of those moments where no matter how ridiculous of an idea, for some reason it keeps clawing itself back into your mind. So almost to prove to myself this is a bad idea, I remember sitting there at this round wooden table in the corner of the library, opening up my spiral notebook and writing best and worst case scenarios to prove to myself this is a bad idea. And I remember writing worst case scenarios. Fail finals. Get kicked out of pre-med. Lose financial aid. Mom stops talking to me. No, mom kills me. There's 20 cons. And the only pro was, maybe win enough money to fund this dream. And it's almost as if somebody tied a rope around my gut and was slowly pulling me in a direction. So that night, I decided to do the logical thing and pull an all-nighter to study. But I didn't study for finals. I studied how to hack The Price is Right. And I went on the show the next day and did this ridiculous strategy, and I ended up winning the whole showcase showdown, winning a sailboat, selling that sailboat, and that's how I funded the book. Thank you. That's not how my mom responded when she found out back then, but I appreciate the love from you guys. Now, so you have to understand, I had sold that sailboat at the time for about $17,000, which when you're in college is $1 million. I'm taking all my friends out to lunch at Chipotle, free guacamole for everybody, I'm feeling really good at this point. And that's when the journey set off. It took me 2 years to finally sit down with Bill Gates. It took 3 years to eventually sit down with Lady Gaga. And when I had started this journey, There was no part of me looking for that one key to success. You know, we've all seen those business books or those TED Talks, and normally I just roll my eyes. But what ended up happening over 7 years of interviews is I started realizing that every single one of these people, it didn't matter if it was Warren Buffett in Omaha, Nebraska, Maya Angelou in Stamps, Arkansas, every single one of them treated life and business and success the exact same way. And the analogy that came to me is that it's sort of like getting into a nightclub, in the sense that there's always 3 ways in. So there's the first door, the main entrance, where the line curves around the block, where 99% of people wait in line hoping to get in. And we all know what that line looks like, people standing outside in the cold hoping the bouncer lets them in. That's the first door. And then there's the second door, the VIP entrance, where the billionaires and celebrities go through. And for some reason, society has this way of making us feel like those are the only 2 ways in. You either wait your turn or you're born into it. But what I've learned, and what I'm sure many of you have seen in your own careers, is that there's always the third door. And at the door where you jump out of line, run down the alley, bang on the door 100 times, crack open the window, go through the kitchen, there's always a way in. And it doesn't matter if that's how Bill Gates sold that first piece of software, or how Spielberg became the youngest director in Hollywood history, they all took the third door. Now, as I was on my way here to Denver, and as I was talking to the Workhuman team over the past few weeks about today's session, I've been thinking a lot about what unites everyone in this room. Because everyone in this room are in different organizations, perhaps different stages in your career. But if we're going to say that the purpose of this session is to instill growth no matter where you are in your career, I know one thing for certain, which is that this year will require more persistence from you on a near daily basis than you've ever had. Because if you're going to take your career to a new level, you need to take your persistence to a new level. It's a non-negotiable. But the question then is, how does persistence actually work? What's the nuance of how it actually unfolds in the business world? And when you study success for 12 years, persistence comes up in a lot of stories. However, there was one moment in particular during my research that completely changed my understanding of how persistence actually plays out in real life, the nuance of how it actually unfolds in our careers. And this story takes place a couple of years into the journey. Now, a little bit of background. Everything that happened with the third door was in a random series of events. Everything that happened was something that came right before it, that led into it. And what you need to know is right before this situation, there was a pretty disastrous encounter with Warren Buffett. And it's a story for another time. We can go into it in the Q&A if you want, but what you need to know is I ended up spending 6 months writing letters to Warren Buffett asking for an interview. And he actually would handwrite responses back. His answer was always no, but he would handwrite responses back. So I just thought I needed to just keep writing, and I kept calling week after week. Every Wednesday morning I would call his office. And those of you who ever started out in sales know that when you're getting rejected for 3 months straight, it feels like there's a cloud over your head. By 6 months of straight rejections, you're ready to cough up blood. And after 6 months of straight rejections, I was finally on the phone with Warren Buffett's assistant, and she invited me to the annual shareholders meeting for Warren Buffett's company, Berkshire Hathaway. And me and my 5 childhood best friends all flew to Omaha, Nebraska. And during the Q&A portion, in front of 30,000 people at the annual meeting, we asked my interview questions to him in front of all 30,000 people. And it was a complete disaster. Buffett figured out what was going on. He ended the whole meeting early. And it was a giant train wreck that backfired on my face and made me want to crawl into bed and just pull the covers over my head and disappear from the world. And it was emotionally by far the lowest moment of the entire journey. And that's where the story begins. Now, if there is one theme of this journey, it's that whenever I was at my lowest points, it was always my best friends who would pull me back. And I have this one friend by the name of Corwin. And after I spent a couple weeks sulking in bed, Corwin called me up and said, let's go grab some lunch and just talk this out. So So Corin and I go to this local grocery store in Los Angeles, and we're sitting down on the sidewalk, and he's trying to get my energy up. And Corin's like, come on, dude, don't you have any other interviews lined up? And I'm like, bro, I got nothing. I was in a real bad mood. And he said, come on, let's say you had an interview lined up. Who would you want to talk to? And I said, look, man, look at what happened with Buffett. Even if I had an interview lined up, I probably messed that up too. And he said, listen, man, you can't be so hard on yourself. Interviewing isn't a science. It's an art. And as we're sitting there, the single most miraculous moment of the entire journey happens. A car pulls up, parks right in front of me in the loading zone. The door swings open, and out walks Larry King. Now, if you all are like me, when things line up so perfectly like that, it's actually when I get the most nervous. And I have a name for that feeling. I call it the flinch. It's when everything you hoped for, everything you planned for, everything you prayed for somehow ends up right in front of you, and your body thinks now's the best time to completely shut down. Wire your mouth shut and turn your feet into stone. And I remember sitting there on the sidewalk, watching Larry King walk right past me, right through the grocery store sliding doors. And I didn't say a thing. And my friend Corwin jabs his elbow into me and says, dude, why didn't you say anything? And this is the thing about fear. Fear is very good at making logical excuses. Fear is very good at making logical excuses. And the smarter you are, the more logical the excuse. So of course my fear tried to come up with a good excuse. And I was like, he's probably, he's probably getting something for his family. I don't want to bother him at a time like this. I don't want to be that kind of person. And Corin said, dude, you are that guy. So of course my fear tried to come up with a better excuse. And I was like, he's probably deep into the grocery store now. There's no way I'd be able to find him. And Corin said, dude, he's 80 years old. How far can he go? So very reluctantly, I get up off this sidewalk and I walk into this grocery store looking for Larry King. And I look around the produce section, no Larry. I go into the bakery section, no Larry. And right then I remember he had parked in the loading zone, so he must be leaving any second now. So finally this bolt of adrenaline kicks in, and now I start running down the aisles looking down each one. No Larry, no Larry, no Larry, no Larry. I'm cutting through the frozen food section, he's not there, and I figure he's gotta be at the checkout counter. So I'm sprinting down the checkout counter, looking down each one, no Larry, no Larry, no Larry, no Larry. She looks devastated, by the way. And by the way, I felt the same way. And the part that was hurting me the most was the fact that I knew that when he had been right in front of me, I hadn't said anything. It was me who blew it. And I remember walking out of that grocery store through the parking lot, staring down at my feet, wanting to kick myself. And I finally lift my head up, and right there, 20 feet in front of me, right about where you are, is Larry King, suspenders and all. And I don't know what got into me, but it's almost as if all this pent-up rejection and frustration began combusting inside of me. And I started yelling uncontrollably at the top of my lungs, Mr. King! And the echo in the parking lot was so embarrassingly loud. I will never forget Larry King holding his groceries, jumping up like, every wrinkle on his face sprung back. I don't really know what to do, so I just ran over and said, Mr. King, I'm so sorry. My name's Alex, I'm 20 years old, I just want to say hi. And he goes, okay, hi. And he walks the other way. So I'm trying to think of something intelligent to say to save the situation, which is going downhill very fast. And now he's walking out towards his car. He's now out on the sidewalk. He opens up his trunk. He puts his groceries in. I'm trying to think of something to say. He now opens the driver's side door. He's about to go inside, and I go, wait, Mr. King! Can I go to breakfast with you? And he looks at me like I'm a lunatic. But before he can respond, he looks around and sees there's now a dozen people on the sidewalk watching the scene go down. So for reasons I may never understand, he looks around, shrugs his shoulders, and goes, okay. I'm like, oh my God, great, thank you so much. And, he's about to get into his car. He tells me where to meet him. He gets into his car, and right before he shuts the door, I go, wait, Mr. King, what time? And he looks at me, and he slams the door shut. And I'm thinking he probably just didn't hear me. So now I'm shouting through the window, Mr. King, what time? And he looks at me, and he starts the engine. I am now flailing my arms in front of his windshield, begging, Mr. King, what time? And he looks over and just goes, 9 o'clock, and he speeds off. Now, the moral of the story is not to chase any of your employees down through a grocery store. The moral of the story comes next. So the next morning comes around, and I walk into this bagel restaurant in Los Angeles, and boom, right there, corner table is Larry King and his best friends. And I had some time the night prior to reflect on my previous day's behavior. And I thought today maybe I would take a different approach and maybe try being a bit more gentle. So I go over and I go, hi, good morning, Mr. King. And he looks up and goes, and sort of mumbles me away. And I'm thinking, okay, no big deal. Maybe he just needs a few minutes with his friends, and when he's ready, he'll call me over. And there's a table next to him that was open, so I sat at that table and I waited patiently. 5 minutes go by. 10 minutes pass. An hour passes. And finally, he stands up and starts walking towards me. And I can feel my cheeks lifted. And then he walks right past me and heads for the exit. And I just sort of put a hand up and I said, Mr. King. He goes, what is it, kid? What do you want? And at that point, I felt a very sharp and familiar pain in my chest. And I looked at him and said, honestly, I just wanted some advice on how to interview people. And he ends up giving me the greatest monologue of interview advice I've heard in my entire life. And at the end, he looks up to the ceiling as if he's debating something in his mind. Then he looks me in the eyes, puts a finger in my face, and goes, okay, kid, tomorrow at 9 o'clock, see you here. And I show up the next morning at 9 o'clock. He waves me over to his table. He asks me why I even wanted to learn how to interview people. I tell him about the book, and he goes, all right, I'm in. And over the course of the next 5 years, I went to breakfast with him over 50 times. Now, it's taken me many years to realize that while this journey, interviewing Larry King was incredible, sometimes it was my journey on the way to get to these people that taught me the most. And this experience with Larry King was the perfect example. And I'll get to the exact lesson on persistence in a minute. One of the things I'll say before, though, is one of the unexpected side effects of spending 7 years trying to get in contact with some of the hardest to reach people on earth was 7 years of straight rejection. And one of the unintended side effects of that was 7 years of having to go to therapy. And one of the things I had to wrap my mind around in order to keep my head on straight is that there's a big difference between the implicit and explicit messages we learn from society. There's a big difference between the implicit and explicit messages we learn from society. I'll give you an example. In your childhood, your mother looks you in the eyes and tells you to eat your vegetables. That's an explicit message she says to your face. Now, let's say you wake up in the middle of the night and you see your mom eating chocolate ice cream in bed. That's an implicit message. And which message do you think has the strongest hold on a child's actual behavior? Of course, it's the implicit message every time. It's scientifically proven. Now, the question for us today is when you take that into the corporate world, does it work the same way? And all research shows it works exactly the same way. Let's say we're talking about a hypothetical company. This hypothetical company says, this year our number one goal is risk-taking and innovation. Great, that's their explicit company culture. Perfect. But let's say someone on your team takes a big swing and misses, but gets fired on the spot. What's the implicit message? And which message do you think has the strongest hold on how a team will eventually behave? It's always the implicit message. And as I work with teams all across America, whenever a leader tells me there's a gap between what they ask their teams to do and what the team eventually does, the fastest way we can label that gap is to call it the implicit messages we don't even know we're sending out. And when it comes to persistence and perseverance, I grew up in California, growing up in the United States, we have pretty amazing explicit messaging around persistence. What do we tell young people all across this country? Try again. If you think you can do it, never give up. It's on every Little League poster in America. But what's the reality of what it's actually like to grow up? Let's say you're trying out for the baseball team. You don't get it the first year. Let's say you don't get it the second year. But let's say you're really brave and you try out a third year and you still don't make it. What do the people who love you the most tell you? What about basketball? Well, you're pretty tall. Why don't you give basketball a shot? By the way, these are not your competitors. This is your mother. These are your best friends. These are the people trying to keep you safe. They send you the implicit message that you're safer if you pack up and you go. And it's not like we enter the workforce and someone in HR sits you down and says, all right, let's unpack your implicit messaging from your childhood before you begin. We carry these messages in our emotional backpacks into every meeting we attend, into every pitch we go to, into every job interview we show up to. We carry these emotional messages in our backpacks everywhere we go. And it wasn't until this experience with Larry King that I could finally see the truth about persistence and my implicit messaging completely shattered. And I finally got to see the truth and the reality. And the truth about persistence, the reality is, you have as many at-bats in your career as you're willing to give yourself. You have as many at-bats as you're willing to give yourself. And that's changed my life forever. Now, the next question, though, is really the hard one. Once you take that mindset and you really ingrain it into your being, what is guaranteed to happen? If anyone here is a baseball fan, what happens if any batter decides, I'm just going to swing my bat more often? They're not only going to get more hits, they're also going to get more misses, strikes. It's not about talent, it's about statistics. Which proves that the enemy of success is not swinging and missing. The enemy of success is not rejection. The enemy of success is not an obstacle. The enemy of success is not falling on your face. So what is the enemy of growth and progress? What is the enemy of success? It's when we swing and miss. It's when we face a rejection, when the pain of that rejection makes us want to stop trying. So our only job in this room today, your only job when you go back to your offices, is to make sure that not only are you swinging more often, but you have a framework. So when you face the inevitable rejections or obstacles on your way, you have a process to move that pain so you can move forward as quickly as possible. And that's what we're going to do right now. The tool I'm going to share with you has taken 12 years of research to develop. And I'm going to make it as simple as humanly possible for all of you, so you can use it in your own career and take it back to your team. How does that sound?
Yeah.
Great. All right, if you have a pen and paper, I want you to open to a new page. If you don't have a pen and paper, you're welcome to take out your phone and write this in the notes section, because I want you to keep this and use this moving forward in your lives. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you exactly what to write down so you can have it in front of you like a menu, like a map, and then I'm going to explain in detail how to work the system. All right, at the top of your page, I want you to write the following. The rejection inspection. At the top of your page, I want you to write the following title. The rejection inspection. Now, the rejection inspection has 3 steps. Step number 1, reset the system. Step number 1 is reset the system. Step number 2, realign the navigation. Step 2 is realign the navigation. Step 3, re-examine the engine. So
So you have 3 steps: reset, realign, and re-examine. 3 R's for the rejection inspection. Now I'm going to go into detail to show you how to work it in your own lives and in your own careers. Now, the best analogy that I've come up with of what it's like to have a high growth career is it's a lot like driving a car on a dirt road in the middle of the night. I don't care how good of a driver you are or how fancy of a car you have. Having a high growth career means you're going to be hitting rocks, potholes, tree branches. You'll get to your destination, but there's no street lamps. Having a linear career, which is great, is like driving on a nicely paved road. But I know everyone in this room, the reason you chose this session is you're all interested in exponential growth. So you're all off-roaders. Now, what happens to any car that's on a dirt road long enough, night after night after night? Eventually, that check engine light turns on. And we all know what to do when a car's check engine light comes on. What do? You go to the mechanic, they get it taken care of, and you move forward. But what we don't discuss as a society is what we do when our internal check engine light turns on. And you all know that feeling. When it's a Thursday night, it's 8:30, and you're still answering emails, and you feel that check engine light turn on. It doesn't tell you what the problem is, but it tells you something's off. Now, our job today is to process that check engine light in as fast as a way as possible so you can move forward better, faster, and stronger. Now, these are the 3 steps to the rejection inspection. The first step is the easiest, and it works just the same way as going to the mechanic. What's the first thing that happens when you go to the car mechanic? They grab your car keys, they tell you to go to the lobby, get a cup of coffee, give us 15, 20 minutes, let us reset your car and see what's going on. And about half the time, they're able to figure it out in the first 20 minutes. And the same is true with the human mind. The number 1 fastest way to solve any rejection or obstacle that's ailing you, it takes a very simple but sometimes a very controversial thing to do. It's take a nap. Turn your phone off, turn your computer off, not for a year, but for an hour. Go for a bike ride, go for a walk, go get some ice cream. I've never heard anyone in corporate America tell me that they really healed their mental health by staring at their screen an extra hour. But I have people say that just 5 minutes outside completely reset their system. Now, why is that so controversial? It's because all of you are high performers, and high performers have the same problem. I have it too, which is when we get rejected or when we face an obstacle, a little voice in our head says, I'll show you. I'll show you. I'm going to put in an extra hour today. I'm going to go an all-nighter tonight. I'll show you. I'll send out 10 extra emails tonight. But the opposite is what heals us. And doing a physical reset is the fastest way to move through. And there's one executive that I met that blew me away. He told me he's an executive out in Florida. He runs a sales organization, and he does big blue chip sales. And this executive told me that whenever anyone on his team gets a big, giant rejection, he takes his top performers, lines them up in the office, he takes out his wallet, and he passes out $20 bills to everyone on the team. And he tells them mandatory, go to the movie theaters, I don't want to see anyone until tomorrow. What does he know? That for $20, he just bought burnout insurance for his top performers. And all it took was a few hours away from their desk to come back the next morning ready to go. Now, we all know that sometimes a rejection at work or an obstacle in your career can be a lot thornier than a cup of ice cream can heal. So sometimes you have to move to step number 2. And step number 2 is realign the navigation. Now, just like any car that's getting beat up over and over again, eventually that navigation system starts going in circles. We all know what it's like. It's no big deal, but you got to reset it. You got to realign it. And the same is true with the human mind. What happens after you face so many obstacles? Eventually, a little voice in your head says, why am I even doing this? What's the point? That voice comes up in my head more times than I like to admit. And the fastest and least expensive way to solve for checkpoint number 2 costs about 10 cents. And what I would recommend is to get a sheet of white printer paper, get a Sharpie, and in one sentence, I need you to write down the reason you started in this role in the first place. And whatever is your reason is the right reason. I wanted to grow my career. I wanted to expand my expertise. I wanted to make more money to provide for my family. I wanted to give my kids opportunities I never had. Whatever is your reason is the right reason. But you need to be honest with yourself and write that reason on that sheet of paper and put it above your desk for a week. And I'm going to tell you exactly what's going to happen. I've done this with enough high performers that I can guarantee you the following will happen. It's not that all your problems disappear. But what does happen is your problems get right-sized. Your problems get right-sized. And you begin to see that that rejection you got was just a small part of a much larger journey. And that's often all the clarity you need to start moving forward. However, a few times a year, there is always an obstacle or rejection in our careers that is weighing us down for weeks. It happens to me every year without exception. There's always one thing that happens that for weeks I just can't let it go. And that's when you have to move to the final checkpoint, which is checkpoint number 3, which is re-examine the engine. Now, what happens to any car mechanic when they can't figure out what's going on? They always do the same thing. They call over for a second pair of hands, another mechanic to come help them to disassemble that engine and find out what's clogging the pipes. Because clearly they can't figure it out themselves. And the same is true with the human mind. And the sentence I'm about to tell you right now is the most important sentence I will share with you in this entire session, so I want everybody to write this down. The engine of the human mind is the story we tell ourselves about why something happened. The engine of the human mind is the story we tell ourselves about why something happened. I know everyone in this room has had a colleague who faced a big rejection and the next day they turned in their resignation letter. And everyone in this room has had a colleague who faced a big rejection and the next day they came in fired up, ready to go. What was the difference? It was the story they told themselves about why something happened. Now, sometimes we can't figure out what that story is, and that's when you call over for that second pair of hands. And your second pair of hands in your career could be a mentor, a colleague, a life coach, a therapist, a spouse, or someone sitting next to you in this room today. Someone you meet outside while you're getting some coffee. Someone who you trust, who you admire their perspective. And what you're going to do is you'll ask them to coffee or get on the phone with them and ask for their second pair of hands. And what you're going to do is you'll tell them the truth about what happened in that interaction, in that rejection, that obstacle. And you have to ask for their help to find out what story is clogging your engine. And I've done this tool with enough high performers to know there are 2 most common stories that clog the engines of high performers in our careers. You ready for them? Number 1, the most common story that clogs our engines is our mind, without us even knowing, creates a story about what that rejection means about us. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not likable enough. I'm not good looking enough to have been able to get a yes. The second most common story that our subconscious brain creates without us even knowing is our mind creates a story about what this rejection means about our future. I will never succeed. I will never close that deal. I will never get that promotion. I will never get what I want. And what happens is when you get a second pair of hands to help you find out what story is clogging your engine. Like a miracle, the second you actually identify it, that story begins to loosen its grip. Right on the spot. And that's often all you need to move forward immediately. So that's the rejection inspection tool. It's yours to use, yours to keep, yours to share with your teams moving forward. Now, before we dive into the Q&A, I want to share one final story that to me completely changed my understanding of the definition of success and failure, and more importantly, the relationship between success and failure. And this story takes place toward the end of the 7 years of interviews. Now, just like with that Larry King situation, there was that disaster right before it. Right before this interview, there was another disastrous encounter. This time it was with Mark Zuckerberg. And again, it's a story for another time, but what you need to know is I ended up getting introduced to Zuckerberg over email through another interview subject. Zuckerberg agreed to meet me backstage at an event he was speaking at, but when I arrived at the event security thought I was an imposter. They thought my email from Zuckerberg was photoshopped, and they didn't let me in, and I blew the entire meeting. And it was one of those situations where it felt like I had fumbled the ball on the 5-yard line and blew the whole game. And I remember waking up morning after morning after morning, beating myself up over and over and over, to the point where my insides felt black and blue. And that's how I felt internally as I stepped in this final interview with Quincy Jones. Now, as I'm sure many of you know, Quincy Jones had more Grammy Awards than any music producer in history. He worked with Frank Sinatra and Ray Charles and Stevie Wonder. He produced the best-selling album of all time, Michael Jackson's Thriller. He produced the best-selling single of all time, We Are the World. He helped discover Oprah Winfrey and Will Smith. He produced the movie The Color Purple with Steven Spielberg. He created the show The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. He's undeniably one of the most successful people in entertainment history. But the second I walked into his house, I realized I don't know the half of it. So you all have to picture this. Quincy Jones's living room was this perfectly circular room with gold lighting coming from the floors. And right in the middle, there was a couch. So I'm sitting down on this couch, and a few minutes later, in walked in Quincy Jones. And he was, again, around 80 years old at the time. He was wearing a long blue velvet robe with gold stitching at the bottom. And he sits down next to me, and he asks me where I'm from. And I go, "Oh, hi, Mr. Jones, my name's Alex. I'm from Los Angeles." And he goes, "No. I said, where are you from?" And I'm wondering, is this a riddle? I don't understand what this guy's talking about. And then finally I go, oh, my family's originally from Iran. And he goes, "That's what I thought." And he launches into a 30-minute story about dating a Persian princess, trying to break the Ayatollah out of prison, and he sucks me into the Quincy Jones vortex, and it is the happiest place on earth. This guy had a story about everything. He's talking about the pyramids in Egypt. He's talking about Rio's Carnival. He somehow has been everywhere, had spoken to every person on earth, and had a story about everything. And about an hour and a half into our conversation, he tells me a story that completely changes my understanding of the relationship between success and failure. And if we're here to discuss what it takes to grow in our careers, we have to understand the right relationship between success and failure. So Quincy explained to me that when he was first starting out in his career, when he was first starting out in the music industry, back then the whole music industry was run by the mafia. Back then in the United States, the whole music industry was run by the mafia. So one day, Quincy went into this music executive's office to get a publishing deal signed. And Quincy walks into this music executive's office. The executive is sitting behind the desk. The executive slides the contract across the table. Quincy reads it. And the contract says that Quincy will only get 1% of his own publishing. And Quincy, was about to say something, but he looked up and saw that behind the executive were all his cronies. And the executive leaned forward and said, "Listen, kid, you can ask for whatever you want, but you're only getting 1%. And I'm listening to the story and I'm cringing. I look over at Quincy and he's laughing. He's like, "Oh man, they stole all my stuff." I'm getting more and more upset. I look over at Quincy, now he's smiling fondly. "Oh, I'm still trying to get that stuff back." And I'm like, That's messed up! And he looks at me a little shocked why I would have an outburst like that in the middle of the story. And only in hindsight can I see that I was still so beat up internally from that experience with Zuckerberg that any story of someone young getting taken advantage of or making a mistake was completely setting me off. And it's almost as if Quincy understood something about me that I didn't. Because he put a hand on my shoulder and he said, "It's all right, man. It's how you learn." And it's almost as if my body was this overinflated tire. And Quincy had just hit this escape valve and all this excess pressure was rushing out. And he looked at me and he said, "Listen, most people hate their mistakes. They want to pretend their mistakes never happened, and they treat their mistakes as their biggest enemy. And that's the biggest mistake you can make. Because it's only when you treat your mistakes as your best friends, it's only when you cherish your mistakes can you finally learn. And only then can you grow. Your mistakes are your greatest gift." And of course, that was great advice, but before I knew it, the Quincy Jones vortex kept on going. And another hour goes by, and another hour goes by, and we've all been at a point in a conversation where you feel it, eventually coming to a close, and I just looked at him, I said, "Mr. Jones, I gotta tell you, this conversation has changed my life." And he's like, "Oh, that's so beautiful, in what way?" And I said, "Well, you really showed me what it takes to grow." And he said, "That's so incredible, like, in what way exactly?" And I said, "Well, you showed me that the only way you can grow is by traveling and going on adventures." And he goes, "No! No, you need to cherish your mistakes." And it's almost as if he wasn't going to let me leave that room until the lesson sunk in. And in that moment, it did. And I remember sitting there and having this epiphany that I had spent my entire journey assuming that the opposite of success is failure. If we go back to implicit and explicit messaging, what do they teach us when we're growing up? The opposite of up is down. The opposite of success is failure. But it wasn't until I was sitting there with Quincy Jones that I could finally see that the opposite of success, the opposite of failure, are not the same. Because at the end of the day, success and failure are different sides of the same coin. Because they're both a result of the same thing. They're both a result of trying. So the opposite of success isn't failure. The opposite of success is not trying. And I remember sitting there and swearing to myself that from this point forward, I would be unattached to success and unattached to failure, and instead be committed to trying and growing. And that is the number one thing I want to share with all of you this morning. Now, for the remainder of our time is the part that I'm the most excited about. Because now we're going to open it up for Q&A. And for the next 20 minutes, I want to make this as useful and as practical as humanly possible. So, we're going to come around with roving mics. So all you have to do is put a hand up in the air. So you can start thinking of your questions now. And my only request for all of you is that the harder the question, the more honest the question, the more fun it's going to be. So you can talk about whatever is on your minds. Things you're struggling with at work, things you're dealing with at home, how I got the interviews, what I learned in the interviews, if my mom is still speaking to me. It's all fair game, and if you throw a hand up, we'll come over to you right now. Yes, sir, right here in the front. And then we'll go to you next. What's your name?
Richard.
Everyone, let's give it up for Richard. All right, I know it's still, the morning, but like we love him. Give it up for Richard, everyone. Hi, Richard, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. So, you seem like a very multi-talented person.
Look at this. Nailing the question right off the bat. All right, keep going.
And I imagine that you have a lot of different passions. Oftentimes, I think successful people tell other successful people to narrow your passion or your interest into one thing and becoming the expert. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. And then also, can we get lunch?
He was listening. Now, hold on to the microphone for a second, Richard. I have the answer, but before I give it, I want you, if you're comfortable with it, sharing a little bit more about why that question about focus is pressing for you.
So I do a lot of different things. I wear a lot of different hats. And I've been fortunate to be on high school, college, and law school career panels. And one of the interesting questions I'm asked is, how do you remain happy? And my answer is, why you're asking me, but the answer for me is I try to diversify my happiness. If my work isn't going well, I serve on the school board, so I have that identity. If that's not going well, I coach high school mock trial, and that gives me meaning and purpose. And I have other interests that I want to pursue. But as I'm pursuing all these things, I'm wondering, am I making enough progress in those areas? And so that's why I was curious about what your thoughts were on figuring out whether to really hone in on one or two things, or continuing my let's be happy and just kind of diversify different interests and outlets.
Great question. Who here, by the way, relates to Richard's question? Hands up all the way. Okay, great. About half the room. Perfect. Now, first of all, even in your question, you already had a great answer there, which is, the very common advice, which is to focus your career on one thing. It's a good business strategy, but it's not the best happiness strategy. Now, there's a nuance you were sharing, though, which is the difference between focusing in your career and focusing your life. My heart breaks when I meet people. If you guys allow me to go there and just say the truth, my heart breaks. It happens more often than I can say. When I meet people, I ask, how's your life going? They say, great. I say, what's going on? And they just give me career answers. And if it's at like a family gathering, I'll ask them, because it's a family gathering, I'll say, how's your heart? And they're like, I'm not focused on relationships right now. I only care about work. And my heart just shatters. I've never met somebody say that job promotion was really comforting on their deathbed. Now, I think you already knew that. I think the answer you were looking for is, how do you find the right balance? And the truth is that with our careers, focus isn't a nice to have, it's a must have. But the question is, when do you switch into that gear? And I'll give you a very small anecdote. Something that people don't really know is that when Mark Zuckerberg was starting the Facebook when he was at Harvard University, he had 12 other startup ideas at the same time. Now, they don't say that in business books, because it's not a very fancy, it's not a very fun narrative. But that's the truth. Something people don't know about Bill Gates. When he started Microsoft, when he was an undergrad in college, he said, I'll take a semester off, and if it's not going well, I'll go back to college. And guess what happened? It didn't go well after the first semester when he went back to college. They don't talk about that in the news. So the reality is that whenever we're starting a new chapter in our careers, whether you're 18 or 58, at the end of the day, when you're starting a new chapter, it's really good to look wide. Because the truth is, we never know what our purpose is perfectly. The only way we know is when we open a dozen doors and we see what's behind it. But, I'm not going to name names, but you can see people in the news right now who are highly successful, who are running like 15 organizations, who seem to be melting all 15 down. Oh, you guys know who I'm talking about. But that guy was really good when he was running one or two. Not even good, he was one of the best in the world. So, it's about knowing when to shift the gears. So when we're talking about our careers, the short answer is to take your success to the next level. You want to be focusing and narrowing and going all chips in on what you're the best at. In your organization, they know if we want this done, we go to Richard. But when you're starting a new chapter, if you're leaving your industry or even flirting with leaving your industry, you want to start wide. It's very hard to go narrow and then wide. You always want to start wide and then go narrow. But that's in your career. In your life, I think your question was the perfect answer, which is diversifying our fulfillment. Is not just nice to have, it's a must have. Because I've never met anybody who said, being with my friends 24/7 fulfills me my whole life. I've never met anyone who said being in my career fulfills me my whole life. We need fulfillment in all places. And relationships are essential. In a sense of purpose, which is what work is at the end of the day, a sense of purpose. If they just gave you your salary, eventually you would start losing your mind. Eventually you would want something to do. Even if it's not work, you want something to give back. It's part of the human experience. So diversifying where you get your fulfillment is something beautiful. Richard, great question. Give it up for Richard, everyone. Who's next? What's your name? And then we'll go to you after.
And then Allie has someone at the back.
Oh, Allie has one there, and then we'll go here. Hi there, what's your name?
Hello, everyone. My name is Smiley.
Everyone, let's give it up for Smiley!
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you. You're gonna find my question a little weird.
Bring it.
So you interviewed all these successful people, the so-called successful people. What are they after now? They've reached the peak of success. Have you ever asked them what's next? What are they after now?
It's a good question because what I believe you're getting at is when you reach one mountaintop, where do you go from there?
Correct.
Now, there was an implicit question that I heard as well, and tell me if I got it right, which is how do we even define that mountaintop?
Correct. Define success.
Great.
Yeah.
Now, the bare bones, non-negotiable definition of success straight out of the dictionary is actually the easiest one and the best one, which is it's getting what you want, getting what you're after. It's achieving a goal. Now, the problem is our society has taken the word success to define it as a singular goal, which is external accomplishment. When people say success, Forbes magazine says success, they're only describing external accomplishments. That's not good or bad, but it's skewed. So for example, Bill Gates is someone who's used often. When I was starting this journey when I was 18, it was a natural fit. But, after he became the richest person on earth, what has he spent the past, let's call it 15 years of his life doing? Focused on curing public health issues. Malaria, polio. Trying to find an energy breakthrough. Now there's other people. Steve Wozniak. He built the first Apple computer with his bare hands. You might call him the most successful engineer in human history. When I interviewed him, all he could talk about was how excited he is for the road trip he's taking to Lake Tahoe with his wife and son. And his smile was giant. So I think your question's exactly right, which is as a society, we need to widen the definition of success to not just outer goals, but inner goals as well. Are you achieving your fulfillment? As Richard said, are you diversifying your relationships and where you get your happiness from? A lot of my journey over the past 15 years of studying success, in the beginning, the first half, as you can tell, was all on external goals. Is Lady Gaga the happiest person on earth? I don't know. I didn't care about that. I cared about how she was able to achieve external goals. But the past 5 years, I've really been focused, as you can probably tell, on that inner success as well. And the reality is, as a society, we have not crossed that bridge to include both definitions in the word success. And that's something I'm very passionate about. So Smiley, thanks for that question. Give it up for Smiley, everyone.
All right, we have one back there, and the next one will come down here.
Hi there, what's your name?
Oh, hi, I'm Crystal.
Where are you, Crystal? Oh, there you are. Hi.
Yeah. I have a question about how you manage to get in front of all these famous people. Like, I'm not trying to meet Bill Gates, but I'm trying to meet small business owners of like very, very small business owners, and they're very hard to get through their, receptionists or gatekeepers, or they just don't answer your emails. What's the secret to get in front of those people?
Perfect question, and I'm going to give you an answer that changed my life. You ready? Chris, I want you to take out a sheet of paper, and anyone who relates to this question, I want you to take out a sheet of paper and write this down. What I'm going to share with you is a cold email template that I learned in one of my interviews that changed my life. I was interviewing an author by the name of Tim Ferriss, and the reason he was so interesting to me is that he got his publishing deal for his first book when he was 29 years old, with no prior writing experience, and when I interviewed him, he told me that the way he did it was exactly like that question. He was able to contact different people who he didn't know and find a way to meet them. And he told me a lot of different ways of how he networked his way there, but the most interesting was this cold email template. Because the best way, of course, as I'm sure you know, is a warm introduction, meeting someone in person, but sometimes we don't always have that luxury. How do we make sure that our emails, especially in a world where AI is sending 500 spam emails a day, how do we make sure we break through? And this is the cold email template, and I'll tell it to you word for word. I have shared this cold email template with readers around the world, and the response has been remarkable. Some readers have told me they've gotten responses from the CEO of Apple. Some readers have told me they've gotten Sheryl Sandberg to respond. This cold email template works. There's one financial advisor who works for Merrill Lynch out in Chicago, and he said he was trying to get in contact with this big billionaire family who, for 6 months, was just completely ignoring him. As a final Hail Mary, he just copy-pasted this cold email template. He got a response right away, and he closed the deal. And this is how it works. You ready? Mm-hmm. Okay. You start off very simply, dear so-and-so. And then your opening sentence is this. I'm sure you get a lot of emails, so this will only take 60 seconds to read. Boom, next paragraph. 2 sentences maximum of who you are and why that's relevant to that person. So whoever you're emailing is going to be different. It might be your job title. It might be that your kids go to the same school, or whatever's relevant to that person. It might be an award that you had or something that you've done, but something that's relevant to that person that makes them want to be interested in it. But 2 sentences maximum. It's not your CV. Boom, next paragraph. Again, 2 sentences max of a highly specific question for that person. So it's not, what's your advice for my career, or are you open to connecting? Something that's really specific that they can answer. And the best way to ask yourself if it's a specific enough question is to ask yourself if they are reading your email as they're walking through a parking lot going to their car, can they respond with one hand? Because people don't normally sit at their computer and answer cold emails. They normally do it while they're at the grocery store waiting in line. So you want them to have a really easy chance to answer that question. And then the final paragraph is the clincher. And you say, I totally understand if you're too busy to reply. Even a 1 or 2 line response will completely make my day. All the best, Alex. All right. We have a couple minutes left, so we have time for one final question. Remember, I already promised her, are you? Okay, she said hers is quick, so we're going to do that person back there and you here, and we're going to combine the answers. And if you all want, in about 30 minutes at the, wherever the Welcome Center is, I haven't seen it yet, but there's a book area. I'll be there signing books and answering questions. I'm happy to meet all of you and answer your questions there. Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, great. What's your name?
My name's Diana.
Hey, give it up for Diane. Hi, Diana. Nice to meet you. All right, let's hear it.
So are you going to have lunch with Richard?
We're going to have lunch with Richard. Richard's very sincere. Richard, she's got your back.
Gotta ask more than once, right?
I love it. Richard, I'll tell you the truth right now. I am flying at it here pretty much as soon as I finish the book signing.
He didn't say
But
that.
I'll give you my email. We can talk from there. Does that sound good? Okay, great. All right, all the way in the back.
Hi, I'm Jen.
Hi, Jen. Everyone give it up for Jen, our final question.
Mine's personal. Okay.
Great.
I have one kid who's got the third door, and I have one kid whose inner narrative is telling themselves the story, you know, both short and long-term story. They're negative, right? So this could be a very long answer. So I'll say, what are 2 to 3 things as a parent I can do to help her understand that she needs to revisit how she looks at failure, right? And you know, with kids, it can be very layered and lots of things that go on, right? So, and this is something I've been working on for a long time. So, asking as a parent, what are a couple things that I could do to help her learn that lesson?
First of all, I just want to say I commend you for your vulnerability and courage. I'm going to give it up one more time for Now, that's a perfect question to end on because it applies not only to those of us who are parents, it applies to all of us who are leaders at our organization. Because at the end of the day, HR in particular is the role where we are really trying to inspire the mindset and the culture of the entire organization. So whether that's a family or a business unit, everyone in this room is a leader of your own culture. So that's a perfect question. And if I had to summarize your question, essentially what you asked is how do we inspire the third door mindset in others? Whether that's kids or in our coworkers. And I'll tell you the biggest lesson I've learned in 12 years. And we'll end on this note. If I've learned one thing over the past 12 years, it's that you can give someone all the best tools and knowledge in the world, and their life can still feel stuck. But if you change what someone believes is possible, they'll never be the same. Now, I'll share with you an anecdote of how that really impacted me that most, how that lesson sunk in with me most. Because at the end of the day, what we want to be doing is not telling people what to do, we want to show them what's possible. And I'll use an example of a young person in a situation like you said. During my research, I came across this story of a teacher who was teaching for Teach for America. And she was assigned to a school in Baltimore, Maryland, in a really rough part of town, a really tough school. And she was assigned to about maybe 3rd or 4th grade. And eventually she realized these kids need some inspiration. They need to open up their minds. So she said, all right, today instead of our math lesson, we're all going to draw pictures of our biggest dream in life, what we want to be when we grow up. So she passed out papers and crayons, and all the kids started coloring. Except for one boy sitting in the back of the class. He won't touch the crayons. His face is blank. And then about 5 minutes later, his eyes light up and he starts coloring. And at the end of the day, the teacher collects the papers and the kids go home and the teacher's going through them. And she sees that that young boy drew a picture of a pizza delivery man. And the teacher was very concerned. So she called the mother that night, and the boy's mother said that she wasn't surprised. She explained that the only male figure in this boy's life who wasn't in jail or on drugs was his uncle who delivers pizza. And what I learned from that story is that young people will always reach for the highest branch they believe is possible. All of us can only reach for the highest branch we believe is possible. So it's our jobs, whether it's families, schools, or the HR community at large, to illuminate more branches. And that's the mission moving forward. Thank you all so much. It was such a pleasure being here with all of you today.